Ever wondered what makes TV so powerful in Jamaica? Time to find out. Welcome to Global TV Group 358, where television meets innovation. We're not just about shows, we're about shaping society. In Jamaica, TV keeps you informed, connects diverse voices, and supports democracy. Imagine a Jamaica where broadcasters unite, sharing data and collaborating globally. That's us, a unified voice in the TV industry. Did you know TV advertising is still king? It drives website traffic, boosts brand equity, and powers integrated campaigns. Even in an age of digital, TV stands strong, resilient in tough times. Our Global TV Deck is your treasure trove of insights and data. With charts, graphs, and success stories, it's your guide to impactful TV advertising. Curious to learn more? Visit our website and see how Global TV Group 358 keeps television at the heart of entertainment in Jamaica. Get ready to binge watch the future.
For me again, you can't for me again. You hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. Can't buy scandal, we can't buy time. You can't for me again. Can't for me again. You can't for me again. You hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. You touch up line and a resort to cry. You can't for me again.
What fi gonna eat no money, what fi at you, eat no at you. Covid money, miss away in the yellow rat you. Use the youth, the money, waste no must a man to statue. Say me like a catch you, but me got in a figure you. Take the spit of money, gal and say that it's not you. One day the man above end up, him a got a bed. Too much it in the kitchen, some a fly well like a patu. The singers and DJs and social media's coming at you.
It burn me,
300% raise.
it burn me,
Garbage pile of it.
it burn me,
Give the teacher them
it
raise.
burn me,
I see corruption face.
it burn me,
Mash down the people them house.
it burn me,
Every day appear arms out.
it burn me,
Appear money them a thief.
it burn me.
And them a sell out with each.
Can't for me again. You can't for me again. You hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. Can't buy scandal, we can't buy time. You can't for me again. Can't for me again. You can't for me again. You hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. You touch up line and a resort to crime. You can't for me again.
Come me say big up all the charities and all of the givers. Some a go like say them powerful, me no make a bigger. The already promises, none of them not deliver. Cut up the youth, they rough and they down in our fever. Member bowl honey and they lie them tell. Corruption smell and they pocket them swell. When police don't a market like Satan out of hell, go mash up people start like thief when them sell.
It burn me,
Or they treat the market man.
it burn me,
Or them a treat the cat man.
it burn me,
Or they treat the peanut man.
it burn me,
Or them a treat the dirt man.
it burn me,
Or them a treat the soul man.
it burn me,
Or them a treat policeman.
it burn me,
How them a treat soldier man.
it burn me.
How them a treat everyone.
Can't for me again. You can't for me again. You hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. Can't buy scandal, we can't buy time. You can't for me again.
Stibbidim day, stibbidim day, stibbidim day. We in Global TV say certain kind of friend we no keep. And some informer friend we love like. We in Global, bona fake friend and bona tape. We in Global, we not promote them, we not support them. Look at them on the cheek, come here represent for. We in Global TV, check it.
From flying around the world, addressing parliaments in his one sweatish t-shirt, Zelensky today has been proverbially boxed and kicked around in the Oval Office. He was literally shown the door. Good night and welcome to geopolitics. It is quite an interesting day in geopolitics. The American crumbling system hasten on with the trade war, the tariff, and the all sort of unceremonious behavior of the one president, Donald Trump. It was very good that the comedian got the treatment he deserved today. Barter with the blood of his people with a depraved President Biden issuing money and weapons to continue to killing children. Zelensky have no power when it comes to how this war winds down. Zelensky weren't funding it. Europe is on their face. Let's see how long this thing tagger on. Good evening, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us. Lovely to have your support. To my community of party and all my family members, platform moderators, membership holders, viewers, subscribers, commenters, and trolls. Good evening and welcome. Good evening, TikTok. Good evening, IG. Good evening to my YouTubers. How are you all doing? The Electoral Commission of Jamaica has given their advice to the Prime Minister. It wouldn't surprise you, though, that Andrew Holness would violate the advice given. We will look further into that. Marcia Thomas, good evening. Debbie Jarvis TV, good evening, and welcome. Empress Deb, good evening. Like and share the live, please. RJ, good evening. Meet and Teach, good evening and welcome. Sheena Kelly, good evening. Who else to hear? Canadian Gal, good evening. JP Bros, Willie Don, good evening. Althea, good evening. Josette Williams, good evening. Marcia Gale, good evening, everybody. Let me see who's on TikTok. Joy, Colo, Darrell, D, David, Kula, Dean. Good evening and welcome. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Florence Fagan, good evening. Kevin, good evening. Sharon Clark, good evening. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We will look into the aspects of the potential of the rise of Africa, given Trump rant and raving about the place. Trump economic warfare, for me, is only giving rise to the Chinese to broaden their influence, as well as broaden the influence of BRICS. The longer President Trump carries on with his tirade. But on the geopolitical side of things, the good old great politician, my favorite politician in the UK, the indefatigable George Galloway, has given the crooked Piers Morgan a good old going on. And after we looked briefly at the Zelensky issue, then I'll let you see how Piers Morgan get handled by the illustrious George Galloway. Lauren Gordon, how are you? We want to show you a clip of, we're not going to show you exactly the fullness of what happened. It's just a clip reporting and what has transpired after, because President Trump, Lyndon Wagwan, President Trump has literally booted Zelensky from the White House.
The building, his motorcade exited just a few moments ago. And I can tell you, Dom, I'm just texting now with some officials in the West Wing to get a little bit of the behind the scenes of what happened. I'm told by a White House official here just in the past couple seconds that the President of the United States kicked Vladimir Zelensky out of the White House today. That is the description that we're being given of what happened after the part that we saw on camera. The president kicked him out. Is the text from a White House official. So dramatic stuff there. You saw that at the departure, President Trump clearly did not come to say goodbye or have a handshake at the end. There was a woman in a blue dress who shook Zelensky's hand. I'm told that is the protocol officer, new protocol officer of the White House who did that duty. Zelensky moving very quickly into the vehicle there, as you can see. Let's replay a bit of the contentious moment. Contentious doesn't even do it. Just the heated exchange between the two men here in the Oval Office just a short time ago. Take a listen.
You're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing.
So the president there upset at what he saw as Zelensky being disrespectful to the United States, to him personally, to the American taxpayer who've provided hundreds of billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine over the years. J.D. Vance, the vice president, suggesting to Zelensky that he hadn't even said thank you once during the course of that meeting. Zelensky then turning it about onto J.D. Vance and saying, well, you've never been to Ukraine. You should come and see it. Vance saying those are just propaganda trips. The whole thing spiraled out of control in a relatively short period of time. And you wonder now, Kelly and Dom, whether or not this relationship can be put back together into anything of the sort that the Ukrainians need it to be in order to get some kind of result out of this war that allows Ukraine to continue to be an independent country.
Eamon, we learned...
Well, a lot of people are surprised by that. I'm kind of not. I'm kind of also happy that such a fiasco and debacle took place in public today for all of us to see. Other presidents would have taken it behind closed door. Zelensky never had a choice in how this war started. He's not to have one in how it's ended either. It's between America and Russia. This particular American president wants to wind the war down. It has cost too much money and it has cost too much life. What Zelensky wants is a president that will continue to give him money and weapons to continue to drink the blood of his people. When the war started, America has violated many times the agreement when the Soviet Union disintegrated. The NATO expansionism should not have gone east of Germany under that agreement. The Americans push. They're all the way up to Poland now. Biden gave Ukraine the green light to join NATO. Russia weren't having it. That was the green light for Russia. You come further, and it will spark the same or worse as the Cuban Missile Crisis under the American hegemon. If this was the reverse case, that Russia is putting its missile in Cuba or Venezuela, all hell would break loose. This world does not belong to America. Putin has drawn a line. Ukraine must not join NATO. It threatens my security. Putin has the right to do that. Just like America would have the right to say, Putin cannot put a missile in Cuba because it threatens my security. Zelensky bartered with his people blood. Zelensky have no say in how the war has started. He did not fund the war. When the war started, NATO was 30 countries. They are now 32 because Finland and I think Sweden has joined. If 32 countries or 30 Zelensky cannot defeat Russia, less won't defeat him. The war must wind down, and President Trump must wind it down in whatever way it can. The killing is too much. Let me show you how Piers Morgan get handled by the British top politician, George Galloway. Because I him over here have sense. The rest of them are a bunch of numpties. The rest of them are a bunch of old numpties.
It's really come to something when having spent a lifetime, myself fighting against NATO and American wars, it's the Americans that are trying to stop the war, and Piers Morgan, Boris Johnson, and Keir Starmer who are trying to keep it going.
I don't want to keep it going.
You've got a lot of Ukrainian.
I don't want to keep it going.
You've got a lot of Ukrainian blood on your hands. You have lied about this war from the beginning.
Actually, Vladimir,
you have lied about the origin of this war, about the duration of this war, about the course of this war, and now having caused you and your war party the death of 1 million Ukrainians while claiming to love Ukrainians, you're now calling for British lives to be lost.
What a load of absolute bullshit.
That constitutes close to a war crime. You're going to regret it when very soon Zelensky is sitting in a beachfront villa somewhere counting his ill-gotten gains, and all the secrets of the rampant corruption between the Democrats and the Zelensky regime begin to tumble out of the cupboard. This war did not begin 3 years ago. You very well know that it began in 2014. You very well know that it began with a coup against the elected president of Ukraine, backed by Victoria Nuland and the administration at that time, and supported by you. You very well know that the criminalization of the Russian language, which followed hard on the heels of that coup, was the proximate reason for an uprising in the east of the country amongst Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian people. You very well know that Zelensky and his predecessor rained down shot and shell on the people of East Ukraine for 8 years before Putin intervened in 2022, and that 14,000 people, most of them women and children, were killed in that onslaught. You very well know that Zelensky was preparing for a final onslaught, a final solution. And while I'm on that subject, you're always telling us how much you love the Jews. You're supporting a regime which puts up statues to Nazi collaborators, to generals of the Galician division of the SS. You are
Zelensky is Jewish, you know that, right? You know Zelensky's Jewish, right? Do you?
But that's like saying there's no racism in America because Obama.
So so you're calling the Jewish leader of Ukraine a Nazi. Is that your position?
That's like saying there's no racism in America because Obama was briefly the president of the country. The entire western part of Ukraine played a decisive role in the mass murder of Jews and Poles and others in the Second World War. And now they are heroizing the heroes of the SS. Why doesn't Donald Trump agree with you?
Because he's wrong.
Well, you know, you have been up his ass all of these 2 decades.
Really?
You've kissed his feet.
Really?
You've licked his boots. You've fawned upon him.
Really?
You have been his super fan. And now, on this fundamental question of our age, he's entirely wrong. Years, everybody watching knows you are Trump's biggest ass.
I like
kisser.
him.
Everybody
I like him.
watching.
I like
knows
Donald
that.
Trump.
I know you like him.
I like
don't
him.
like him.
And on
You
many
like
things,
him.
on many
But
things,
on this, he's
I
wrong.
like him. And on many
fundamental
things,
question.
let me finish.
The biggest question
Yeah.
in politics in the world today, he's got it completely wrong.
No, it's his little expittle.
Ukraine was the most corrupt country.
What, more
in
corrupt
Europe
than Russia?
More
corrupt than Russia?
It was designated by the economists,
What about Putin?
by the FT,
What about Putin?
by everyone who knows
What about
about these
Putin?
things. I'll tell you what, your mate, Donald Trump, is going to open every book, every drawer, every filing cabinet, and you're going to be embarrassed.
Yes, George Galloway.
If you want to make a full-time income from home working part-time.
Because one thing with George Galloway, you cannot argue with his facts. And because Piers Morgan is so horrible,
it's really come to something.
When it comes to facts, you just cannot argue with Mr. Galloway. But we're going to shoot off into our first piece of geopolitics at the moment. Let me see what we're going to look at in this part. We're going to look at how Trump tariff war could be backfiring, that give rise to a closer partnership with China and the continent of Africa. Let's go into this, and then we'll look at some new development that Abraham Ture is making.
China has quietly positioned itself as Africa's key space partner. Billions of dollars are poured into satellite technology, ground stations, and research centers across the continent. From Egypt's space city to Ethiopia's satellite tracking facilities, China is embedding itself in Africa's space future. Meanwhile, the U.S. has largely ignored Africa's growing role in space. China has seen its true potential. Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. How far can U.S.-China collaboration go? Let's find out. For decades, Africa was...
And yes, the information in this segment is brought to you by Black Culture's Diary.
Mostly overlooked in global space programs. The United States and Europe focused their investments on their space missions, rarely engaging Africa beyond basic weather monitoring or telecommunications. But China saw an opportunity. With Africa's geographic advantages, its untapped potential in space science, and its growing need for modern technology, China moved in fast. President Xi Jinping's announcement of a $50 billion investment in African space initiatives over the next 3 years is not an act of charity. It is a strategic move to secure influence over the future of space development on the continent. For African nations, this represents an unparalleled opportunity. Decades of Western aid often came with restrictions, conditions, and political strings attached, limiting Africa's ability to develop independent space programs. China, in contrast, has taken a practical and cooperative approach, offering direct investment, technology transfers, and specialized training to African scientists and engineers. With state-of-the-art research facilities and satellite assembly plants now operational in Egypt and Ethiopia, Africa is no longer just a user of space technology. it is a creator. But Africa's role in the space race is about more than just technological progress. It is about sovereignty and positioning in a new global order. The continent's strategic location near the equator makes it a prime
my teeth were falling to pieces and I needed a fresh start.
Hub for satellite tracking and deep space communications. Critics in the West have argued that these partnerships could create a long-term reliance on Chinese technology. However, the reality is more nuanced. The development of Africa's space sector is still in its early stages, and every nation that enters the space industry requires years of collaboration with established space powers. The United States, for example, has worked closely with European and Japanese space agencies for decades, yet no one questions those alliances. Why should Africa's partnership with China be seen as a dependency rather than an opportunity? Moreover, Africa's collaboration with China has already produced tangible benefits. Multiple Earth observation satellites launched with China's support for agriculture, monitor climate change, and manage urban development. These advancements enhance national security, economic planning, and disaster response, ensuring that Africa can compete on the global stage rather than remain reliant on Western data providers. The true contrast is not in whether Africa works with China or the United States, but in who has shown real commitment to Africa's scientific future. While China has engaged in long-term investments, the United States has taken a hands-off approach, offering little beyond diplomatic agreements. NASA currently operates only one ground station on the continent, while China has built multiple. Washington's Artemis Accords, intended to shape the future of lunar exploration, have only been signed by 3 African nations, a sign that the U.S. is not offering enough incentives for broader cooperation. A major factor in this shift is the declining role of U.S. foreign aid. Under Trump's leadership, America scaled back its financial support for African space initiatives, leaving a gap that China was more than willing to fill. The U.S. has also chosen to focus on private sector-led space expansion, particularly through companies like SpaceX, rather than building state-driven partnerships with emerging space nations. For African countries looking for direct investment, infrastructure, and expertise, China has become the more reliable partner. Now the question is, what nation is particularly making significant achievements? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Here comes Egypt. Egypt's journey into space is more than just an expansion of its scientific capabilities.
Welcome, Sexy K.
It is a statement of ambition, progress, and leadership in Africa's growing space sector. With a long history of scientific achievements dating back to ancient times, Egypt is now embracing modern space technology, proving that Africa can be a central player in the new global space order. The country's space program, driven by strategic investments and international collaboration, is no longer in its infancy. It is evolving into a powerful force with long-term goals, including satellite development, deep space exploration, and regional space leadership. At the core of this transformation is Egypt's Space City, a state-of-the-art space research and development hub located 30 kilometers east of Cairo. This ambitious project is a testament to Egypt's commitment to space exploration, and it serves as the headquarters of the Egyptian Space Agency. Space City is designed to be the center of Africa's space activities, providing the infrastructure needed for research, satellite assembly, and training programs that will shape the next generation of Egyptian and African space scientists. Egypt's space ambitions received a major boost through its strategic partnership with China, which has played a key role in accelerating the country's technological capabilities. While Egypt has long envisioned a national space program, the transfer of advanced knowledge, funding, and technical support from China has significantly reduced the time it takes to develop and launch satellites. One of the most remarkable achievements of this collaboration is the MISR-Sat-2 satellite, Egypt's first domestically assembled satellite. Built with China's assistance, this satellite represents a turning point for Egypt's independence in space technology. Rather than simply purchasing pre-made satellites from foreign suppliers, Egyptian engineers actively participated in the assembly, testing, and final integration of MISR-Sat-2. This hands-on approach is equipping Egypt's scientists and engineers with the expertise necessary to build and manage future satellites independently. Beyond Mesersat-2, Egypt has successfully launched other satellites that serve multiple purposes, including climate monitoring, agriculture planning, and disaster management. The Horus 1 and Horus 2 satellites, both launched in 2023, are playing a crucial role in Earth observation, allowing Egypt to collect and analyze data that enhances national security, resource management, and urban development. Apart from that, Space City is more than just an administrative headquarters. It is a technological ecosystem designed to host research laboratories, assembly facilities, and testing centers. The site also serves as the main location for Egypt's growing involvement in regional and international space projects. The Egyptian government has positioned Space City as Africa's leading space hub, making it a critical part of the continent's efforts to strengthen its space capabilities. One of the most advanced features of Space City is its satellite assembly plant, where Egyptian engineers, trained by experts from China, are working on assembling future satellites. This facility allows Egypt to move away from dependency on external satellite providers and instead develop its systems that cater to local and regional needs. With cutting-edge satellite testing chambers, Space City ensures that all satellites meet international quality standards.
Press your finger against your calf. If the imprint remains, it may be a sign of edema. If you don't know what edema is,
before they are launched into orbit. The facility also houses space monitoring telescopes, which provide real-time tracking of satellites, asteroids, and other space objects. These telescopes are some of the most powerful in the region and are being used for both scientific research and national security applications. With this infrastructure in place, Egypt is positioning itself as a leader in space observation within Africa. Egypt's geographic position makes it a key location for space operations. Situated at the crossroads of Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, Egypt has a unique advantage in satellite tracking and deep space communications. Recognizing this, the Egyptian government is using its space assets to not only serve national interests, but also contribute to international space missions. Egypt's space program has already had a significant impact on the country's development. The data collected from its satellites is being used to enhance precision farming, track water resources, and monitor environmental changes. This is especially important for a country where agriculture and water management are crucial to national stability. Egypt has no plans to slow down. The government has laid out an ambitious roadmap for the future, which includes expanding its fleet of satellites, with plans to launch more locally assembled spacecraft in the coming years. So, Egypt's space program is no longer an experiment. It is a rapidly expanding sector that is shaping the future of African space exploration. With Space City as a symbol of this progress, and with China's partnership providing the resources needed to build a strong foundation, Egypt is well on its way to becoming a leader in the global space community. But with that, how is the US losing the space race in Africa? The United States once had the opportunity to be Africa's closest ally in space exploration, but instead, it chose control over collaboration. Rather than engaging African nations as equal partners, Washington approached the continent with the same outdated colonial mindset that has defined its foreign policy for decades, offering conditions, restrictions, and a condescending attitude rather than genuine cooperation. In contrast, China saw Africa's potential, treated it with respect, and helped it rise as a key player in global space development. As a result, the US is now losing Africa to China in the space race, not because it lacks technology or resources, but because it refused to see Africa as an equal in shaping the future of space exploration. For years, NASA ignored Africa's space ambitions, keeping the continent at the margins of the global space race. While African nations were eager to develop satellite programs, ground stations, and space monitoring systems, Washington offered little more than diplomatic gestures and symbolic agreements. Even when the US engaged with African countries, it did so in a way that reinforced dependency rather than empowerment. American space cooperation typically came with restrictions on technology transfers, political conditions, and limited access to high-level expertise. African nations were often left with hand-me-down technology, outdated infrastructure, and training programs that kept them reliant on Western expertise rather than building their capabilities. China, on the other hand, did the exact opposite. Instead of treating African nations as second-class participants, it shared technology, built research facilities, and trained African engineers to develop their space capabilities. China recognized that Africa wasn't just a customer, it was a partner in space development. This fundamental difference in approach is why today, China has deep space partnerships with over 23 African nations, while the US is struggling to remain relevant. One of the biggest reasons the US is losing the space race in Africa is that it tried to dictate terms instead of building trust. When Washington wanted African nations to join its Artemis Accords, it expected them to align with a Western-dominated space framework that would ultimately benefit US interests more than African ones. Only 3 African countries, Angola, Nigeria, and Rwanda, signed on, while many others chose to work with China's International Lunar Research Station, ILRS, instead. Why? Because China isn't asking Africa to follow someone else's vision. It is helping Africa create its own. While the US demands compliance, China builds infrastructure. While the US imposes restrictions, China funds education and training. While the US tells African nations what they can and cannot do in space, China hands them the tools to do it themselves. This is why African nations like Egypt, South Africa, and Senegal have chosen to collaborate with China on lunar exploration, ensuring that they will have a direct role in future moon missions rather than simply watching from the sidelines. Another critical mistake the US made was handing over its space leadership to private companies like SpaceX, rather than prioritizing long-term partnerships with African governments. Unlike China, where the state actively invests in space programs across Africa, the US has largely left its space expansion to private interests. Elon Musk's SpaceX dominates the American space industry, but it has no interest in building Africa's space sector. Musk's focus is on profitable ventures like Starlink and Mars colonization, not on helping African nations develop independent space programs. The US government, instead of countering China's influence with its state-backed investments, has allowed private corporations to set the agenda, an agenda that does not prioritize Africa's role in space. Meanwhile, China has actively worked with African governments to establish ground stations, train engineers, and launch satellites, proving that its partnerships are based on long-term collaboration rather than short-term business deals. By failing to establish its network of ground stations in Africa, the US has ceded control of one of the most strategic regions for space exploration. This means that China now has superior tracking capabilities in the southern hemisphere, while the US is left with limited coverage. The difference between China and the US in Africa's space sector comes down to respect. China listened to what African nations wanted and delivered, while the US assumed it could dictate terms and lost its influence as a result. China did not treat Africa as a market for its technology. It helped Africa build its own. It did not hoard knowledge and limit access to space resources.
Have you financed a car with Close Brothers Motonovo or Black Horse from 2007? They could owe you thousands.
It opened its universities, training centers, and research labs to African scientists. The US still holds the world's most advanced space technology, but technology alone is not enough to win influence. By choosing control over cooperation, it has pushed Africa toward a future where China is the primary space partner for the continent. The real story here is not just that the US is losing the space race in Africa, but that Africa is finally winning. With the right partnerships, African nations are no longer waiting for permission to join the space race. They are taking charge of their future. China's investments have accelerated Africa's entry into the global space industry, and the US now faces a difficult choice. Change its approach and start treating Africa as a true partner, or continue watching from the sidelines as Africa and China build the future together. One thing is clear: Africa's space age has arrived, and it is not looking back. Now the question is this a new space Cold War? The battle for space supremacy is no longer just about who lands on the moon first or who builds the most advanced satellites. It is about who controls the future of technology, data, and global influence. The growing divide between China and the United States in Africa's space sector is not just a regional issue. It is part of a larger geopolitical struggle that mirrors the old Cold War, but this time, the battlefield is space. For Africa, the rise of a new space race presents both opportunities and risks. On one hand, China's investment in African space programs is creating new scientific and economic opportunities. Countries that once had little involvement in space exploration are now launching satellites, training engineers, and participating in global space missions. However, this new reality also comes with challenges and potential consequences. If Africa becomes too dependent on Chinese technology, it risks becoming a passive player in China's space ambitions rather than an independent force. At the same time, aligning too closely with the United States could limit Africa's access to Chinese-funded infrastructure and scientific cooperation. Many African nations have chosen to remain neutral in the US-China space rivalry, accepting investment from both sides while maintaining diplomatic independence. Ethiopia, for example, has received space funding from China, but has also expressed interest in cooperating with the United States. South Africa has partnered with China on lunar exploration but remains engaged with Western-led scientific research programs. This balancing act reflects a broader trend in global politics, where African nations are no longer simply aligning with Western powers by default. Instead, they are making calculated decisions based on economic, scientific, and geopolitical interests. The coming years will determine whether Africa emerges as a true space power or remains a battleground for global superpowers. If African nations can leverage both US and Chinese investments to build their independent space programs, they could become key players in space governance, resource exploration, and satellite technology. Do you think the US should try to win back Africa? Should Africa prioritize China over the US? Let us know in the comments section. What's better for Africa? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel.
Well, in my opinion, a China relationship will be much better and more productive for Africa and the globe in general. Throughout the rise of America, they are slowly going down the hill now, one must agree. Carlton. The American hegemon has used its power to control the world rather than develop the world. More money is being spent on war than development. My problem is not really with China. My problem is with leadership when it comes to our leaders in Africa and the Caribbean. I think we stand to gain a positive partnership with the Chinese, but with good leadership. The problem we are having is with our corrupt leaders, is not with China per se, is how our corrupt leaders run our country. It is how our corrupt leaders arrange these deals when they're arranging them and how they govern their country. So my problem is really not with China, because we have seen Africa and the Caribbean, the relationship with China, we've seen a more fruitful relationship than decades of the World Bank and the IMF strong-arming you in order to keep you suppressed, keep you marginalized, keep you underdeveloped, and keep you dependent on that great Mother Teresa, the Americans. So we're going to look into how partnership can be beneficial with for our countries with the Chinese with good leadership. because leadership are really our problem. Hang on.
For the other animals in your home.
A knee-jerk reaction.
Hold on.
Whether it's pets leaving stains or the other animals.
We no longer want to be exporting ore, soil, and dusts and rocks from the minerals of our continent, but we want to be exporting finished products that have value.
For decades, Africa has been trapped in a vicious cycle, exporting raw materials for pennies, importing finished products at inflated prices, and staying dependent on foreign economies. But Burkina Faso just broke the cycle. In 2025, Captain Ibrahim Traoré inaugurated the Moulin Double Star M2S flour factory, a bold step toward economic self-sufficiency and industrialization. This isn't just about making flour, it's about reclaiming control over the nation's food supply, creating jobs, and rejecting economic exploitation. For too long, Burkina Faso imported nearly all of its 315,000 tons of annual wheat consumption from foreign suppliers, draining its economy and making it vulnerable to global price shocks. But in April 2024, Traoré made a historic move. He suspended flour imports, forcing the country to invest in local production. The message was clear. Burkina Faso will no longer be a passive consumer of foreign goods. It will be a producer and economic powerhouse in its own right. The $23.8 million investment in this flour mill is more than just an industrial project. It's a blueprint for African nations seeking true economic independence. If successful, it could inspire a wave of industrialization across the continent, proving that Africa does not need to be dependent on the West for food, fuel, or finance. But can Burkina Faso sustain this bold step, or will foreign forces try to undermine it? Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. Let's get started. Burkina Faso has entered a new phase of industrialization, and at the heart of this transformation is the Moulin Double Star M2S flour factory, a project that represents more than just economic progress. Built in Gampela, Saba, this facility stands as a symbol of the country's ability to chart its economic destiny. With an investment of 15 billion CFA francs or 23.8 million US dollars, this flour mill is not merely another industrial plant. It is a clear declaration that Burkina Faso is ready to process its resources rather than rely on external imports. The scale of this project is significant. Covering an expansive 5-hectare site, the factory was
Save time creating content and generate a high-quality
designed to accommodate the demands of a nation that has long depended on foreign wheat supplies. The structure itself is an R+5 building, a multi-story industrial complex that houses not only advanced flour processing equipment, but also storage facilities, administrative offices, and quality control laboratories. Every aspect of this facility has been designed to ensure that it functions as an independent and efficient producer of high-quality flour, reducing the country's need to import from foreign markets. At full capacity, the M2S factory is projected to produce between 220 and 300 tons of wheat flour per day, a staggering output that marks a decisive shift in the country's ability to meet its own needs. Alongside flour production, the plant will also generate 80 tons of bran daily, an essential byproduct that can be used in livestock feed, further strengthening Burkina Faso's agricultural sector. By establishing this factory, the government is not just investing in food production, but in a broader economic ecosystem where flour, bran, and other wheat-based products can fuel domestic industries. However, the impact of the M2S factory goes beyond production numbers. One of the most immediate and tangible benefits of this project is job creation. The factory will employ at least 300 full-time workers, offering stable incomes to families that previously relied on seasonal or informal labor. However, the real economic boost comes from the additional 10,000 seasonal jobs that will be generated by the supply chain surrounding this facility. Farmers, transporters, warehouse workers, and traders will all see opportunities arise from this single investment, as wheat must be transported, processed, packaged, and distributed across the country. This expansion of the job market aligns with a larger vision, an economy built on local labor and production rather than dependence on imports. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. To ensure smooth operations, the M2S factory has also implemented a modern supply chain and logistics system that will allow flour to reach bakeries, food manufacturers, and consumers efficiently. This logistical structure is essential for making sure that the flour produced in Gampela does not simply sit in storage, but actively replaces imported alternatives in daily use across the country. The factory is also equipped with cutting-edge milling technology, allowing for different grades of flour to be produced, each suited for specific needs, whether for bread, pastries, or other wheat-based goods. The establishment of this factory is not just an economic venture, but a strategic decision. Burkina Faso has long struggled with its dependency on imported goods, and food has been one of the most vulnerable sectors. While the country has a rich agricultural sector that produces staple crops like maize, sorghum, and millet, wheat has remained an exception, an import-heavy commodity that has made the country susceptible to price fluctuations, currency devaluation, and external trade policies. By setting up this factory, the government is taking its first major step toward removing a critical point of foreign dependency and reshaping the economic landscape. But a factory is only as strong as the policies that sustain it. In the past, similar industrial ventures in Africa have failed due to poor planning, lack of government support, or foreign economic sabotage. Recognizing these risks, the leadership behind M2S has ensured that the factory's operations are aligned with national economic goals, integrating it into broader industrial and agricultural strategies that guarantee long-term sustainability. Instead of simply launching the factory and hoping for success, the government has structured its food policies to actively support domestic production, creating a business environment where local flour producers can thrive. Moreover, the presence of M2S does not just benefit Burkina Faso alone. Neighboring West African nations are also potential buyers of Burkinabe-produced flour, meaning that this factory could become an export hub in the future, turning the country from a passive importer to a regional supplier. This level of ambition, where a single investment is positioned to create both domestic stability and external economic influence, is exactly the kind of forward-thinking strategy needed for long-term development. But the inauguration of the Moulin Double Star Flour Factory is more than an economic project. It is a political act, a rejection of the decades-old economic system that has kept African nations dependent on Western imports. For years, Burkina Faso has relied on foreign suppliers for wheat and flour, leaving its economy vulnerable to price fluctuations, trade restrictions, and geopolitical decisions that have nothing to do with the interests of its people. With this factory, the country is breaking away from a system designed to keep it dependent. The global food industry has always been an extension of political control. For African nations, wheat is a prime example of how foreign dependency is maintained. Burkina Faso, like many other nations on the continent, has imported vast amounts of wheat from Western countries, particularly from Europe and North America, despite having the potential to process its food. This was never a coincidence. It was a deliberate outcome of economic policies that ensured African nations remained consumers rather than producers. International institutions, trade agreements, and so-called development programs have pushed African governments toward reliance on imported goods rather than investing in local industries. The result has been a continuous cycle of economic vulnerability, where a single global crisis, be it a war, a financial crash, or a supply chain disruption, can send shockwaves through African economies, leading to food shortages and price hikes. By establishing its flour production, Burkina Faso is effectively declaring its independence from these external forces. No longer will the country be at the mercy of international wheat prices dictated by Western corporations. No longer will it have to adjust its economy based on the supply decisions of foreign agricultural giants. Instead, it is taking control of one of its most essential food industries. This is not just about self-sufficiency. It is about economic sovereignty. It is about refusing to let a foreign entity dictate whether Burkina Faso's people can afford bread. The decision to suspend flour imports in April 2024 was a bold move, one that sent a clear message. Burkina Faso will no longer finance foreign economies at the expense of its people. This move was not without its critics. Some economic analysts, particularly those aligned with Western institutions, warned that restricting imports could lead to short-term shortages and price hikes. However, these arguments ignore the reality that continued dependence on imports is not sustainable. In the long run, Burkina Faso must be able to produce its goods to control its economic destiny. The suspension of imports was not a knee-jerk reaction. It was part of a broader strategy to shift the nation's economic structure. Western governments and corporations are well aware of what this shift means. If one African nation successfully builds its industries and reduces reliance on imports, others will follow. And that is a problem for those who profit from Africa's dependency. The global food industry, much like the energy sector, thrives on maintaining unequal power dynamics. Western-controlled trade systems rely on Africa continuing to buy processed goods instead of producing its own. When a country like Burkina Faso decides to cut itself off from this system, it is not just making an economic decision, it is making a political statement. This is why attempts to undermine local production often follow when African nations take steps towards self-sufficiency. History has shown that when African leaders push for industrialization, they face intense economic pressure, sometimes even external sabotage. The wheat industry is no different. Western-backed trade agreements have long made it difficult for African nations to compete with imported products, flooding markets with subsidized goods that are cheaper than anything local producers can offer. The moment Burkina Faso tries to sell its flour, these forces will likely mobilize to push back. Whether through economic measures, media narratives that cast doubt on the quality of local production, or even direct political interference. But the timing of this factory's launch is key. The world is changing. Global supply chains are no longer as stable as they once were. Countries that once relied on Western imports are rethinking their economic models, turning inward, and strengthening their local industries. Burkina Faso is positioning itself ahead of the curve, making a strategic move that will allow it to stand on its own feet while others continue to struggle with reliance on unstable foreign markets. Beyond the immediate impact on Burkina Faso, this move sends a message across Africa. If a country with limited resources like Burkina Faso can take this step, what is stopping wealthier nations from doing the same? The truth is nothing but economic policy choices.
Most UK parents make this mistake without even realizing it, and it could leave their family struggling.
If other African governments follow suit, prioritizing local production over foreign dependency, they too can reclaim control over their industries. The M2S factory is not just about Burkina Faso's flour supply. It is a model for how African nations can regain control over their economies. In the past, leaders who attempted such bold moves were met with resistance. Thomas Sankara, for example, tried to make Burkina Faso self-sufficient in food production in the 1980s, only to be met with external opposition. But today, the global landscape is shifting, and nations that choose to industrialize and break free from dependency have more opportunities to succeed. Ibrahim Traoré is not just launching a factory, he is continuing a legacy of African economic liberation. The battle for economic independence does not end with the opening of a single factory. There will be challenges. There will be pressure from foreign powers that do not want to see Burkina Faso succeed in this endeavor. But the foundation has been laid. The decision to establish M2S is proof that Burkina Faso is no longer willing to be a passive player in the global economy. It is willing to fight for its right to produce, to process, and to control its resources. And in doing so, it is challenging a system that has kept Africa in economic chains for far too long. Now the question is, how will Burkina Faso's decision impact Africa's industrialization journey? The process of industrialization is not just about building factories. It is about creating a system where local production thrives, where raw materials are processed into finished goods within national borders instead of being shipped abroad for minimal returns. Africa's economic problem has never been a lack of resources. It has been a lack of infrastructure and strategic policies to process those resources. Burkina Faso,
Dalfi,
under
thanks
Captain
for
Ibrahim
sharing the live.
Traoré, has chosen to break away from this pattern. Instead of exporting raw wheat and then paying to import processed flour at a much higher cost, the country is ensuring that every step of the value chain happens locally. This shift does more than just keep money within the economy. It fosters skills development, builds technological capacity, and ensures that Burkina Faso can produce its food without relying on foreign suppliers. Industrialization is not just an economic necessity, it is a matter of national security. Any country that depends on imports for essential goods is at the mercy of those controlling the supply. If a crisis occurs, whether political, economic, or environmental, import-dependent nations find themselves vulnerable to shortages and price manipulation. By producing flour locally, Burkina Faso is insulating itself from these risks and ensuring that its people have access to affordable, domestically produced food. The logic behind this move is clear. Control over production equals control over economic destiny. Many African nations have struggled with this realization, often because of pressure from international financial institutions that have promoted open market policies that benefit foreign producers more than local industries. For decades, African governments have been encouraged to prioritize trade over self-sufficiency, leading to economies that are heavily reliant on imports, while their industrial potential remains untapped. Traoré's approach disrupts this narrative. He is proving that African nations do not need to accept the status quo, and that they can choose to develop their industries instead of continuously supporting foreign economies. This model, if followed by other African nations, could spark an industrial revolution across the continent. The economic success of any country is determined not by what it consumes, but by what it produces. Countries that export raw materials and import finished goods remain in a cycle of economic stagnation, while those that develop industries based on local resources build wealth, employment, and long-term stability. Burkina Faso's flour factory may be just one step, but it represents a shift in thinking, one that prioritizes production over dependency, investment over short-term convenience, and long-term economic planning over external reliance. What makes this shift particularly significant is that it is happening in real time, without waiting for external approval or funding. In the past, African governments were often told that industrialization required years of planning, massive foreign investments, and the involvement of international corporations. But Traoré's approach is different. He is showing that a country does not need to wait for external validation to take control of its industries. Burkina Faso did not need an IMF-backed program or a World Bank-funded initiative to start producing its flour. It simply needed leadership that understood the importance of local production and the courage to act on it. This approach also challenges the idea that industrialization in Africa must follow the same blueprint as Western economies. The West industrialized over centuries through colonization, resource extraction, and labor exploitation. Africa does not need to replicate that model. Instead, it can build industries based on its own needs, resources, and economic realities. Burkina Faso's flour factory is an example of an industrial project that is built for the people, by the people, designed to serve a domestic need, rather than function as an export-driven facility meant to cater to foreign markets. Industrialization is not just about building factories, it is about creating entire ecosystems that support production, distribution, and consumption. The success of the M2S factory will depend not just on its ability to produce flour, but also on its integration into the broader economy. The government must ensure that bakeries, retailers, and food manufacturers prioritize local flour over imported alternatives. This requires a combination of policy support, incentives for local businesses, and public awareness campaigns that encourage consumers to embrace locally produced goods. What Burkina Faso is doing is not just about flour, it is about setting a precedent. If a landlocked country with limited financial resources can take this step, why can't wealthier African nations do the same? The truth is, they can, but they must be willing to challenge the systems that have kept them dependent for so long. They must be willing to invest in their industries, even when it is easier to rely on imports. They must recognize that true economic freedom comes from the ability to produce, not just consume. The Traore
My team used to spend more time updating me on their work than actually doing it. Turns out there's a better way. Take a look.
model is simple. If you have raw materials, process them. If you need a product, manufacture it. If you want independence, build it. It is a model that does not wait for external approval and does not rely on foreign aid or multinational corporations to take the first step. It is a model that prioritizes African production for African needs, ensuring that resources remain within the continent rather than flowing out to foreign economies. Burkina Faso's flour factory is not the end of this journey. It is the beginning. Industrialization is a process that requires continuous investment, policy support, and public participation. But the foundation has been laid. A country that once relied entirely on imported flour now can produce its own. If this success is expanded across other sectors, if Burkina Faso moves beyond flour to textiles, food processing, and other industries, the country could set an example that reshapes Africa's economic future. The only question now is, who will follow this model next? Do you think more nations need to stand on their own feet? Let us know in the comment section. Do you think the West will let Africa be self-dependent or somehow try to stop this? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about. The Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
That's our geopolitical slot tonight. And in this last video, what it does show with great leadership, with good leadership and wholeness, it doesn't take an awful amount of time to turn a country around. The 6 years that Andrew Holness told us that he spent fixing our macroeconomy, Jamaica is still yet to see the promised prosperity. While Andrew Holness was doing that for 6 years, within 3 years, President Traore has turned his country around. Leadership is what is failing us as a country. Leadership is what is failing us. And when you have a leader like Andrew Holness, who flout advice, who floats the rule of law, who even floats the legislative procedures, majority. We see it with many legislative steps where the Prime Minister strong-armed the legislature because of his majority in Parliament. The Prime Minister is at it again with the new creation of the Portmore Parish. Not only that they are, I hear some people saying, a dunce, them dunce are what? No, it is being barefaced and dictatorial. The Electoral Commission is in Andrew Holness's office. Earl Jarrett wrote to them twice in June of last year, as well as in February of this year of the violations of this current draft. Andrew Holness have access to legal advice, the Attorney General and others. Parliament have their own legal counsels. All these different departments of government have their own legal counsels. There were quite a few people copied into the correspondence. Colleen Lull, I think Tam Tavares, the permanent secretary for Desmond McKenzie's ministry. It is that what is unfolding is that everybody will have to take Andrew Holness' instruction and do whatever they're told to do, regardless if it makes sense or not. If you're writing a legislation to those legal people who draft this bill that Desmond McKenzie took to Parliament, the Portmore Galangin, you would want to be aware of what the Constitution says, particularly the Constitution, because it's the highest force of the law in our land. Blake Wagwan. You would want to be aware of what the Constitution says and that matter. And in your writing of that bill, you ought to have written it in a way not to contravene the Constitution or any act of Parliament in operation that prevents you from doing so. They would have known all this beyond the advice given to them last year, June. It would be the job of those lawyers in the civil service who are putting this bill together to make sure it doesn't contravene the Constitution or an operating act. The instruction would have been given by the Prime Minister to carry on with this bull crap. Because even after the advice of the EOJ, the Prime Minister and his team still went ahead. It's not that they went ahead without knowledge. It's that they went ahead barefaced because of their majority in the legislature. And this is why Andrew Holness needs to be removed. Or if the PNP can work them way up to get rid of Andrew Holness, we need back a balance in the legislature where Andrew doesn't have the power to just vote anything he wants to vote through or Parliament willy-nilly and make it become law. But does it surprise you that Andrew Holness looked the other side from the advice given? It's really not a surprise. Andrew Holness is a dictator. These are the things dictators do. They control all the reins of power. Power and money is what dictators like to take control over. But I am not surprised, and none of us ought to be surprised. from the time when him waddled the EOJ and Office of Political Ombudsman together, we've been singing loudly and dancing out here. Even though they're in his office, they would have given him the correct advice. The Prime Minister still went ahead and floated because of his majority. And that must go, we must get rid of that in our country. One political party having so much of a powerful hold over the country legislative chamber. It's not safe. We see how Andrew Holness used it time and time against us. And I think this ought to be our wake-up call to pull our country back from going into a dictatorship. If there wasn't a time when we come to our senses as people and wake up, this is the time for this generation to wake up, because everything has changed fast round, you know. Yeah, I go soon one day and back soon down on the road, you know. Because everything has changed round, you know. Everything I take over by something else new. And when you just want to stay in a black and white TV days. But one of these days, AI go soon up on the road and back soon a flatter dot. And then when we wake up, it's a bullshit. I saw deep, we into the matrix. But I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It's, you know, Friday nights. We try to bring you something geopolitical, because with the instability of a Donald Trump president, the geopolitics can go either way at any time. Hence, it is really a good time for us to keep our eyes close on the geopolitics. This world is just one web. Pull one of the strings, the entire web shakes. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you for your support. I may not come on tomorrow. I may just rest and make my allergy hurry up and move on and get on to where it's going. And hopefully we'll be back out here on Sunday, you know. But, you know, our country is Jamaica. It's always keeping. You know, something may happen where we have to run out on the weekend. If it warrants that, we definitely will. But otherwise, we will definitely take our Saturday and have our rest. So thank you all very much for your support. If you're new to Global TV, make sure you give us a subscription or a follow. And make sure you hit the like button before you exit. I timed out real sweet. I producer Wayne by accident. What's the timing? Did it give? It should. The timeout should be a specific time. It should. Once it's a timeout, it should do something there. Hold on. Let me see if I find real sweet. Hold on. Hold on. It's not allowing me to. Hold on. But the timeout should clear up itself after a few minutes, I do believe. It ought to. Because it's not giving me, or otherwise when I finish the show, or the timeout was 30 minutes. Hold on, let me go in. I don't know if I have access to that slot while I'm live. Hold on, let me see. YouTube. Hold on, let me see if I have access to that bit while I'm live. Bear with. Channel. Hold on. I'm not. Hold on. I don't seem to have access in this at the moment. But I'll correct it when I'm done. Hold on, let me go into community moderation. Let's see. Hold on. But after 30 minutes, things should. It's not giving me an option right now because it's a timeout. But after the 30 minutes, it should correct itself. Okay. Anyway, thank you all for being here this evening. Lovely to have your support as always. And you know, if we are doing a live, you will certainly get your notification. So thank you all very much. Have a lovely weekend. And make sure you take your breaks and your rests. So thank you all and good night from Global TV.
If you don't like missing out on the latest shows but still enjoy classic hits, then Global TV Group 358 is your perfect match. Global TV Group 358 isn't just another channel, it's your ultimate TV experience. From breaking news to binge-worthy dramas and timeless classics, we've got it all. Our unique blend of original content and global favorites means there's something for everyone. And guess what? With GTVG's seamless streaming, you can watch anywhere, anytime. Plus, our interactive features let you be part of the action. So, whether you're a seasoned binge watcher or a casual viewer, Global TV Group 358 is here to keep you entertained day and night. Don't just watch TV, experience it with Global TV Group 358. Subscribe now and never miss a moment.